Presented and produced by the National Public Housing Museum, this is Out of the Archives, an oral history podcast created from interviews with public housing residents from across the United States. I'm your host this episode, Mark Jeschke. The stories in this episode span from 1944 to the present day. For a full list of sources, check out the episode notes in your podcast platform. What distinguishes our housing from a home? Many forms of shelter serve our basic fundamental needs: protection from rain, wind, heat, and cold. But the places that we call home often act as a reflection of who we are as individuals. Empty walls present a canvas for radical self-expression. Kitchens exude savory aromas created from recipes passed down through generations. Quiet nooks offer solace, spaces for meditation or rest. In this episode, there's so much magic in the place. We uplift a range of experiences from public housing residents from across the country, featuring narrators from New York City, Milwaukee, Cleveland, and Chicago. These narrators share stories of how their relationships to home and place have shaped and have been shaped by their identities as individuals and communities. Our first narrator in this episode is Connie Lindsay, who lived in Milwaukee's Lapham Park housing project from 1965 to 1974.
The day that we moved in, I remember going up the stairs and seeing 4 bedrooms and just thinking, look at all this space. Look at how absolutely new it is. And, outdoors, a place to be. It didn't quite dawn on me, the density of it, how close all of the units were. But keep in mind, they would be the equivalent of what townhouses look like today, not unlike where I live today. But it was just me remembering the space, the windows, the light. We lived in Wisconsin, and anybody who lives in the Midwest knows how cold and harsh winters can be. And I remember my mother, she worked second shift, which would be essentially 3:30 to 11 p.m. at night. And she would go to work and wait on the bus. And I remember one evening her coming home from work and her legs were literally frozen because she had waited on a bus for so long in sub-zero temperatures. And just remembering what that meant. But she loved her children and she wanted to provide for them. And the things that I think it created inside of me, of when I dreamed my future, what did I want that to look like? And the underlying theme of my life really became, I want to see my mother smile. I want my mother not to have to work so hard.
Connie's story of important matriarchs is a common one in our archive, with countless narrators reflecting on the ways their mothers and other caretakers shaped their lives. Dante Hamilton, who grew up in Cleveland's Garden Valley neighborhood housing projects from 1961 to 1979, shares his own story of his mother, who he described as a pre-social media influencer in the Garden Valley community.
Yes, my mother wasn't the only one. Ironically, I can't remember the others, but she wasn't the only type influencer person in the neighborhood, but she was probably the most prolific one that I could recall that everyone knew. And they just called her Mrs. Hamilton. And so when I would go places, people would say, oh, well, that's Mrs. Hamilton's son. And they didn't know my name, but they knew I was Mrs. Hamilton's son. So I had a special level status because I was her son. And so, the Hamilton family was not like some super high class group. It was just that my mother was well known. She was an activist. She was a community advocate, a community activist, and all of that. So she was involved in the community and keeping the community, bettering the community, bringing services to the community. She wasn't paid to do anything. She was just a volunteer community organizer. And if she did get some type of salary or stipend, it probably was through the neighborhood house or a summer program or something like that. But she was very, very active. And when I say active, I just mean, doing stuff that was for the good of people in the neighborhood, educating them about whatever. she was very good at organizing, educating people, telling people about the latest developments, the latest things that are going on. They sent my mother to different housing complexes. I actually remember that they sent her to, I think it used to be a complex here, Henry Horner, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, she had a big trip that they organized with buses to the projects in Chicago. There was some big public housing convention, and this had to be probably back in the 70s, 1970s. And I remember her going. And this was like amazing. It was like you were going to the United Nations Convention of Public Housing, and it was here in Chicago. I don't know what the event was or whatever, but it was a big trip. All of the people from the neighborhood. You had all of the people who were like my mother, Mrs. Hamilton. You had all of the Mrs. Hamilton from all over on this trip. They were like a delegation going to Chicago. So she wasn't the only one. She was one of several. And I think every area had like a Mrs. Hamilton person. So, she was probably the star influencer that everybody knew, but she wasn't the only one in the Garden Valley area. It was other parents that were as influential, probably even more influential, but I just probably didn't know them that well because Garden Valley Neighborhood House was across the street from us, and that was the center. That was the centerpiece of Garden Valley Neighborhood, was the Garden Valley Neighborhood House, and she carried a lot of weight there.
In news media and popular culture, terms like welfare queens, super predators, and other derogatory terms run rampant, most often leveled against Black people. Though Daniel Patrick Moynihan's 1965 Moynihan Report first linked the failure of welfare to race, it was the Reagan administration who popularized the term welfare queens, along with the general notion that public housing and the residents who lived there were the root of many social ills. Historian Lawrence Vail argues that this generalization played a damaging role in the average American's perception of public housing, stating, "It becomes a way for the public to generalize the worst-case scenarios, the most violent places, to the entire program." While many issues have plagued public housing communities, resident stories offer another side to complicate the mainstream narrative understanding public housing.
Yeah, I actually had a very good life in public housing, and I was not aware that I lived in public housing until I got in my senior year of high school, which was ironic. I assumed that everybody lived like my family. We lived in a row house in public housing. And of course, back in the day, I'm almost 60. So back in that day, public housing was much different. The baddest person in the neighborhood was a person who stole tires off cars, or if you were like in a gang, or it wasn't even really any gangs back then. The baddest person had a switchblade or maybe brass knuckles. So you had to be really criminal to have any of those elements when I was growing up. So I thought that everyone lived like I lived until I went to the suburbs in high school, and I saw people who lived in $100,000 $1 million homes that were on large acres and mansions. I had never seen any of that. And then I realized that, we actually live in the project. That's what they called them. So, but I was in high school and my family had a car. My mother was a homemaker. She worked some part-time jobs, and my father worked full-time. We went on trips. We did all kinds of stuff that I guess suburban households did. So my father had a club in the neighborhood where he took people on different ventures. The club was called the Jolly Jinx, and we had a uniform, a cap, and everything. So we were like, I had no idea we lived in the projects because we did stuff that you saw on television. And we were going places. We would go to the Apple Butter Festival, Cedar Point, all kinds of different trips. My father would organize these trips, rent cars or buses or whatever, and take people. And I just thought that that's how everybody else lived. I thought that, I'm normal, just like everybody else I see on television.
Though many, such as Dante, had loving, positive experiences in public housing, external perceptions can still have a lasting effect on residents. Connie Lindsay, who we heard from earlier in this episode, shares memories of the 1967 Milwaukee riots. Beginning on July 30th and ending on August 3rd, the riots were a part of a national surge in uprisings called the Long Hot Summer of 1967, originally stemmed from justified outrage against housing discrimination and police brutality felt by the city's Black residents.
I remember the riots of 1967. I remember that certainly in Milwaukee, it generally started, there was a fight or something like that, and the police came. So the riots of 1967, and those were, once again, not unlike today, born out of a demand for a good place to live, having your rights as a human being not trampled on and denied because of your race or something like that, and the economic inequities that existed. I remember in 1967 seeing the National Guard drive down the street not too far from our house, because part of the rioting was happening on what was 3rd Street then. Remember, we lived on 6th Street, so it wasn't that far away. Oh, I remember that, and I remember our family talking about that, and our mother saying, stay inside. Make sure that you stay inside to stay safe. But I also remembered and thought about the why. Why is this happening? Why are people so angry? Why would we resort to violence? Of course, today I understand differently and more about, I think Dr. King talked about, the when you deny people, it can just manifest in so many different ways. And so I definitely remember that and thought about what would change and what could change. And how would we be looked at then, because the rioting happened in our neighborhood? And remember, we lived in the projects. And so how would people perceive that?
We see these complicated juxtapositions firsthand with our next narrator, Ramona Ferreira, who has lived in New York City's Mitchell houses from 2019 until the present day.
There's so much magic in a place where, I think we all know that we can't count on anyone else. And that if something really goes wrong, no one else is going to come for us. So that changes the way we treat each other, the way that we take care of each other. Even with our pets, if one of the dogs is sick, if one of the dogs has a parent that's sick or has an emergency and has to travel, I've given my key to other neighbors, and I have a few chronic illnesses. So if I have to go to the ER for anything, my neighbors, I trust them with my home, with my dog. It's such a magical place. I lived before coming in with grandma, I lived in an apartment in Washington Heights, and it's just a New York City tenement. So it's you knew your neighbors and you had engagements, and I was close to some of them, but we spent so much time even just in the courtyard, right? Crossing each other, seeing each other, people having parties, walking our dogs. I think that the interaction here is so much more consistent and also on a deeper level than what I would have with my neighbors before coming here. Doing the public housing work, I become so overwhelmed at times that I need to remind myself, why am I fighting for this? And why do I want to save public housing? So I took the actual bathroom mostly, and I have to do the same thing to the kitchen, but all of the hardware, the light plates, what are these things called? Thing on the door that you turn, the knobs, the hooks, the bars. I actually put paint stripper on everything, and I stripped all of the paint off every fixture in our bathroom. And there were 7 layers of paint, and below that, everything is stainless steel. And I was why, at what point did people that make decisions about public housing think that it was okay to like hire painters that would just slap paint all over the place and completely ignore that they were damaging fixtures that are like super expensive today, right? So like, as I was peeling all this paint around the house, like I kept finding like the actual plates for each light switch, they're bronze. Like the doorknob for the bedroom door, which is the only original door that we have in the apartment, it's wooden and everything is brass. The doorknob, the plate, the hook on it. And then all of the other doors that are new are that fake wooden, like IKEA stuff, covered in like, it's a weird, I'm looking at it right now. It's like a weird wooden, it's like plastic wrapping all the doors. And the print on the plastic is like fake wood. So I hate that they use like crappy materials, because to me, when public housing was built, they invested in like the best materials possible to make it last long. And now every decision that they make is addressing like a crisis and not thinking about making investments that would last another, 4 generations. So I hate that.
In addition to the visible dilapidation of public housing that Ramona describes in terms of maintenance and upkeep, another factor that has altered the face of public housing in major cities is gentrification. While gentrification has been seen in many cities across the country, some of the biggest demographic and infrastructural changes have occurred in traditionally poorer neighborhoods of New York City, like the South Bronx, where the Mitchell houses are located.
So until like 2012, white people didn't know that this neighborhood existed. So I don't know how they found, I'm sure they just took the train and were like, oh, this is convenient, and decided to stay. So they started turning the buildings below our housing development into their own little space. At one point, the New York Times wrote an article about the neighborhood, which really sped up the gentrification of our community. And Mott Haven all of a sudden became this hotbed for people trying to find cheaper places to live close to the city, and also for developers. So some developers started buying up the land and started constructing luxury towers. Right now we have 6 under construction. And this is in a 2-block radius. So it's 6 luxury buildings. 2 just opened in 2021. And 2 more being built next to those. And like I mentioned, rent is $2,100 for a studio at all these places. So my community was always the poorest congressional district in America. And 52% of the people that live here live below the poverty rate. So this has always been a place that didn't get resources, that nonprofits get rich off. We're full of methadone clinics and substance abuse spaces and shelters. And then since 2012, there's this influx of white people that come to the community basically to sleep, but don't eat in our restaurants, don't shop in our stores. They take the train, but it's one stop into Manhattan, right? So they live in this bubble. So my development is right here. Right behind it is a major highway. And then below that is this space where they've built this alternative reality. So usually when I go into spaces, because I'm politically active, folks have realized they've looked me up Some found out that I used to work for the FBI and the Department of Defense. So like my LinkedIn has like, I went to Harvard, I have 3 masters. Like, I'm not your average public housing tenant. So when I walk into spaces, to have meetings and like discuss community issues, I'm advocating for the interest of like 52% of this community that's poor, Black and brown. And I'm encountering people whose mind is completely fucked by my existence.
Understanding the history of public housing not only helps us understand and combat the displacement and disinvestment of public housing communities that Ramona describes, but bringing the past to the present can also unlock radical reimaginings of what public housing could be in the future. Our last narrator, Willie McShann, is a former resident who lives in Chicago's Altgeld Gardens from 1944 to 1951. She shares a collection of memories that instill feelings of hope for generations of people who will call public housing home.
But I think I could just sum up the matter, it's not a problem. With Altgeld, it's a home for anyone. When you leave home, it's just like having your own, and it's a thrill. As of this day, I still love Altgeld Gardens. My mother was very active in the community, and she was one of the founders of the first PTA that Carver had. She was very active. She served as president as far as holding an office. And the thrill for me was when I was voted in as president and served 2 terms as president of Carver's PTA. And it was really a proud moment for me to follow in her footsteps. God has blessed me, like I said, for 92 years. But Altgeld is still, and it takes the position of number 1. I will put Altgeld above anything that I do. I'm not ashamed of it in any way. And I had to tell some youngsters that one day they didn't live in Altgeld, but they were going to school at Carver High School. And they were talking about Carver, and I just happened to be standing at the bus stop. I was in the city in Chicago. And I told them, I said, "You talking about Carver and Altgeld, Carver High School?" He said, "Yes, ma'am." I said, "Well, let me tell you something I'm a product." I said, "Don't you ever be ashamed of Carver or Altgeld Gardens. Never." I said, because I told them the same thing that I'm doing now. I said, there is a history. We have Cassie Russell, that he was raised in Altgeld Gardens as well. We have some famous names. I mean, I can think of them all at this particular moment. But I do remember his mother was the organist at Progressive Missionary Baptist Church at that time. But eventually they moved. So we have lawyers, we have teachers, we have doctors. All of those titles hold somebody's name from Altgeld Gardens.
This episode of Out of the Archives was curated, written, and edited by Mark Jeschke, Tiff Beatty, and Liu Chen. The episode was mixed and mastered by Seth Engel. The theme song for Out of the Archives is titled Born in the Blues, written, performed, and recorded by former Stateway Gardens resident Keith Hudson. Out of the Archives is made possible through the generous support of the Illinois Arts Council Agency, the Kresge Foundation, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, and the Chicago Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. We'd like to give one last huge thanks to our oral history narrators, Ramona Ferreira, Dante Hamilton, Connie Lindsay, and Willie McShann, as well as the oral historians who recorded their stories, Mark Jeschke, Shakira Johnson, and Dr. Lisa Yun Lee. For more oral histories, check out the other episodes of the Out of the Archives podcast at nphm.org or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for listening, and we look forward to sharing more stories with you soon.